we've seen 257 first-time visitors. About 90% of them have been invited by a friend. 75% of those first-time visitors are unchurched kids.
Should students get a prize for inviting a friend to youth group?
Not an earthly one. I've never stood up and said, hey, invite your friends.
You've never actually told students to invite friends?
No.
You know, that you might be onto something there. So you're challenging them something harder, and then inviting their friends is easier.
Yeah.
Or this, like, I was already coming up with solutions that you're like, don't do that. Like, you're going to waste your time.
It felt like it was about them building their church, not about actually helping the people who are coming. And so if we're constantly getting up saying, invite your friends, invite your friends, invite your friends, like, at what point do you care about us? You know? I guess the end of it is when the kid graduates from youth group, who's going to give him a prize for sharing the gospel with their friend? It's like nobody. Yeah. So are we building disciples who are going to go and make disciples, or are we running a really great program and seeing how many kids we can fit in the room? She flipped me off. And then
in front of everybody.
Yes, yeah. And then a month later gave her life to Christ and is a spiritual great-great-grandmother. 60% of our kids had a gospel conversation in the past 3 months.
What's your stance on that?
Everybody's welcome once, I guess, is what I would say.
The top 5 reasons that many youth ministries aren't seeing new students invited by other students. Unpack some of this. Well, welcome to another episode of Beyond the Youth Room Podcast. I'm Keith, and this is Ryne, and today we're talking about the top 5 reasons that students aren't inviting friends to your youth group. So stay tuned for today's episode. Now, Ryne, you never cease to amaze me for many reasons, but one primary reason that you have amazed me recently is that you have a youth ministry that a lot of kids are inviting their friends to, and it makes me mad sometimes because you're like, even just like when we first met up today, you were like, I have 6 new students in my youth group last night. Yeah, and no, I'm actually happy for you in this regard. But one of the questions that we want to cover today is, if we don't have a lot of students that are inviting friends, why aren't they? And how can we motivate students, and how can we encourage students? How can we dare I say, incentivize students to invite their friends, because we want our youth ministries to grow so that we're reaching more students with the gospel. I was just having this conversation with a parent last night who was visiting her teenagers were visiting our youth ministry, and she's just like, what's your youth ministry, vision? Like, what's your philosophy behind youth ministry? And which very rarely is asked. So I was like, yes, I've been waiting for this moment.
I've been preparing for this.
And I was just emphasizing, it's like, hey, well, we're a go and tell youth ministry. Like, we don't, we're not like a come and see mentality, like where it's like, we just want students to come and then I share the gospel with them. It's like, no, we want to equip students while they're here to share the gospel. One of our key metrics is gospel conversations. And so we're past the days of the attractional model of youth ministry, where it's like, if you have this big event and you give away an iPad and you shoot poodles out of a cannon and have midget wrestlers, that's when you're going to get people inviting their friends. Yeah. And what we found, the flaw in that is that what you win them with, you win them too. So like, if you give away an iPad, they're coming for the iPad and they're not really there because they're spiritually interested a lot of times. Now, all that to say is you have a good mixture of both. So we've been focusing on, where I serve as youth pastor, we've been focused on equipping students to have gospel conversations, really cool stuff. We're having, new students kind of trickle in. And we're trying to develop more of that invite culture. You have seen gospel conversations, the gospel advancing. You've seen students sharing the gospel, but then you also have a lot more students being invited by friends, and they're coming. And so total, in the past year, you have some data for us. And so share with us how many new students you've had, and about approximately how many of those were invited by friends, or just random, like they walked in because their parents now go to your church or something like that.
So in the past 12 months, we've seen 257 first-time visitors.
And you obviously have a church of a mega church of over 10,000 people. And and you have, share with us about like your congregation size, of your church, just to show like that's a that's a huge deal.
Yeah. Our Sunday morning numbers, I would say, all in kids, students, adults, is probably over the summer right now. It's about 650 to 700.
So under 1,000. So you're not like in mega church territory, which is usually 2,000 and above.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So, so 257 first-time visitors that we meet Sunday nights and Wednesday nights. And so that averages out to about 5 per week, which then you could average it down further to about 2.5 per program. And I would say anecdotally, about 90% of them have been invited by a friend. It is very rare that a kid walks in
without knowing someone.
Well, even just like with a parent, like it's very rare for a kid to walk in with a parent or anything like that. Normally when they come, they're with a friend, they're getting out of the car with their friend.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. Like for instance, we had 6 students first time visitors last night. All 6 were invited by a friend. And so that's really been the primary growth of that. I would say about 90%. And it's been really cool to see how many just first time visitors every single week, and trying to keep up with that is something.
So that's a problem that we're trying to solve. We're trying to make it easier for students to invite friends in our youth ministry, and you've had some success in that. So that's why I wanted to kind of pick your brain, because we were just talking about it before this, like I was already coming up with solutions that you're like, don't do that. Like you're going to waste your time.
I didn't say that exactly.
Well, I mean, but that in essence, like,
yes.
Which is going to save me time. So maybe there's someone listening or watching this right now that they're like, hey, we want to build an invite culture within our youth ministry. We also, we want to emphasize like going and telling, like sharing the gospel, equipping students to do that. But, I think a sign of growth is that they feel comfortable, inviting their friends to your youth ministry. And so with that, one of the things that I was thinking of, and maybe people that are listening can relate to, I'm like, okay, we need to incentivize students. We need to like give away something cool for whoever invites the most friends. We need to, make it easy for them to invite. So we're going to create invite cards, or maybe even go to the next step and create digital invite cards that people can share, online and through text and all that stuff. And that's not what you did. And yet you had 257 new students that were primarily invited by their friends. So that brings up the question of what are some of the top 5 reasons that you've observed? So now that you have a year of 257 new students coming to your youth ministry, in which a whole nother episode we could talk about like retaining those students, and which you're actively working on as well. Like, so that doesn't mean that you grew by 257 students, and which is a problem that you're not trying to solve. But to even get the problem of lead generation for students that we're ministering to, like that's where a lot of people are. They're like, I don't even have any students that are coming, let alone like figuring out how to keep them. Like, and so when it comes to the top 5 reasons that many youth ministries aren't seeing new students invited by other students, unpack some of this.
Yeah. So, and I would like to kind of preface this a little bit by saying we're all unique to our own culture.
So I think what you're saying, you're not the expert.
Correct.
Like that's figured it all out and you're talking down to everybody else. But and this is why I wanted to interview you with this, is that you have seen success in this area. And that's why I wanted to just say, like, why don't you share what's worked in your context? Obviously not, it may or may not work, but generally speaking, there's some principles here that I think we can glean from. Yeah,
absolutely. I would say, number one, kids, if you're not seeing visitors, the biggest reason I think is they don't see your programs as relevant or valuable. And that might sting. That might sound really harsh.
Are you calling me old?
No. Relevant, not in a, trying to be cool sense, but just simply we're answering questions they're not asking. We're talking about things that they don't really care about, whatever that looks like. But I think that's the number one biggest thing that I've seen is, look, when we're talking about things that they have questions about, and we're trying to our whole model is like, we want to answer the questions you're asking. I mean, over the summer we've done multiple nights where it's simply just question and answers, and it's like we'll just sit there and we'll answer question after question after question because we're answering what they want to know about. And of course, regardless of whether there's a official lesson or a Q&A, we always have a gospel invitation as well. But you're probably answering questions that they aren't asking. And so if you sit down and you look at your program year round and you say, this is what we're going to teach this time, this is what we're going to teach this time, this is what we're going to teach this time, and you're at a point where kids aren't asking the questions that you're trying to answer, or you're not diving deep enough, or you're diving over their heads. I mean, regardless, it takes different places, but they just don't see it as relevant. And so if they don't see it as relevant, why would I invite my friend? And I think that's a huge thing, is that they want to know, hey, I'm going to invite my friend here because this is a place where they can ask their questions. We're going to talk about something that actually applies to their lives. And I would say anecdotally too about, I just taking a wild stab at this, I would say probably 75% of those first-time visitors are unchurched kids. And so these are kids who, we're not just inviting our Christian friend down the street who, hey, come to my youth group and I'll go to your youth group. And these are a lot of times it's like, hey, they don't have a church background, or they might be a part of a different religion altogether. And so I think when they see it as relevant, then they'll take it upon themselves, and the initiative upon themselves. So that's what I would say is number one. Number two is they're worried. The number two reason that kids do not invite friends to your youth group is they're worried their friends will be unfairly judged. So, and we all know as youth leaders, we're like, look, like the door's wide open. I mean, we've all had that conversation with a kid where they're like, well, I don't think I should invite them to youth group. They're not a good kid. And it's like, no, like invite them. Even more reason.
We had this come up with some of our high school guys when I was just chatting. I was like, because they're talking about friends that need to hear the gospel. I was like, why don't you invite them to? And they're like, well, it wouldn't really fit in here, because they curse a lot. And I'm like, well, they need Jesus just as much as we do. Like, we need to, be okay with people that are rough around the edges, coming in and making sure that. And so I popped that bubble, and the next week, like, they invited a few friends. So I'm like, okay, that was just like an easy, speed bump to get over.
Yeah. And so, we've even had conversations about this before, where it's like, some youth leaders are like, well, if a student shows up wearing this, like, we're going to have a conversation with them. And it's like, look, that is not a business that I want to be in. Thankfully, we've never had something that egregious, but it's like, we're not going to.
Wait, so they show up wearing something?
Like if it's like
an offensive shirt or something?
Well,
or
if it's like super inappropriate or something like that, it's like, hey, we have T-shirts that we give to. I'm like, could you imagine going your first time to youth group and something?
It's like, here's a T-shirt, put this on over your.
Or like, the common one where it's like, we're playing basketball and somebody drops an F-bomb. Yeah. We tell our kids, I've literally said this multiple times, during our program. I'm like, if you bring a friend and they drop an F-bomb during the basketball game, I'm going to look around and see who heard it. And if everybody heard it, I'm just going to have a conversation with your friend and be like, hey, like, let's, If nobody heard it, we're just going to keep on rolling. If you drop the F-bomb, we're going to have a conversation.
Which that brings up a story that you recently told me. You had a person that was invited, and what did you get her out of dodgeball?
I accidentally hit her.
I never hit her at dodgeball.
I accidentally hit her. Yeah.
And what was her response?
She flipped me off. And then
in front of everybody.
Yes. Yeah. And then a month later gave her life to Christ and is a spiritual great-great-grandmother. So that's the same girle whose story I shared a couple episodes ago. That's the same girl.
I know who you're talking about.
Yep.
Yeah. That's hilarious. I didn't realize that was the connection.
Yep. And awesome. So yeah, they're worried that their friends are going to be unfairly judged. Now, we've never said, I don't want to speak for everybody, but it's like, our heart is not, hey, only invite the good kids or the well-behaved kids. Yep. We don't see that. But they subconsciously think, hey, if I invite my friend here who doesn't believe this or doesn't act the way that is expected, then they're going to be unfairly judged, or it's going to make me look bad, or they're going to wonder, why did you bring them? Why did you invite them? And so even though that's not our heart, just by simply saying it out loud, I've literally told kids, like, invite everybody. We don't care. It really kind of
side note on that, because I think people might be going to the extreme of being like, okay, so you mean to tell me you would never ask anyone not to come or never have a conversation with someone? Yeah. And so what would be some examples of people that you would have to have a conversation with, or like maybe even ask to not come back?
Yeah. I mean,
so like, are you in the realm? It's like, invite everybody. It's okay if they come, like,
Yeah.
What's your stance on that?
Everybody's welcome once, I guess is what I would say. Okay. But no, I've only ever had one instance in 6 years where I've had to put a kid on probation from youth group. That's a story for another time.
I can't believe you would kick someone out of church. You horrible person.
But what we've actually found, and I was having a conversation with a couple of our middle school boys who they were talking about inviting this friend for a long time. And they're like, I don't know. And this kid said he'd invited him for years. And so a couple weeks ago, he got a text from his friend. He's like, hey, are you going to youth group tonight? He's like, yeah. He's like, I'm going to come too. And so he came, and the next day I was spending time with these two guys who invited their friend. And they're like, I can't believe it. I was like, what do you mean? They're like, well, not only that he came to youth group, but I've never seen him sit and listen. Like at school, like he is always talking, always getting in trouble. And they were like, but last night youth group, like he paid attention. Like I've never seen him act like that. And so when you have a group that kind of polices itself, when you're a new person, it takes a special new person to walk in and go, I don't care that everybody else is sitting and paying attention and not on their phones. Like I'm going to do whatever I want. And of course we have some kids like that. But the reality is that when you kind of, when they walk into that, they're going to lower or raise themselves to the expectations. And so, of course, yeah, everybody's welcome once. There's some things that we might have some conversations about, but really we haven't really had to have that many because our group has just gotten to the point where it's like, hey, when we sit down and talk about God's word, like that's what it's about. We're not on our phones. We're not doing this. Pace, and so I think, yeah, when you kind of remove that worry that their friends are going to be wrongly or quickly judged, it helps.
Well, and I would say like there's very rare cases, but yeah, I mean, if you need to make a decision to protect the student, like we've had students that have shown up and we're like, we're glad you're here, but you can't sell drugs here.
Yes.
It's like, it's like, there's definitely, I mean, and there's a, thing. It's like, well, I can't believe you would ever ask someone not to come back to church or something like that. But there's certain things that you need to put in place, like where they would be kicked out of the mall.
Yes.
Like that's the standard, like in public places, not just the church. Like we want to make sure that we're protecting people as well. But for the most part, it's all are welcome to come and we've been surprised at how attentive people have been that are like, they're like, I never thought they would be, interested in learning about Christ.
So. Number one, they don't see your programs as relevant or worthwhile. Number two, they're worried their friends will be wrongly judged. Number three, they don't feel safe. Now, this might be a physical safety, or this might be, for lack of a better way to say it, kind of like an emotional safe place where they just don't feel like they can share. They don't feel like they can trust leaders. They don't feel like they can do a lot of it. I've had a lot of conversations with kids where they've been frustrated in the past at other places where they felt like youth group was just kind of like school, where it was like you go in the bathrooms and kids are doing all kinds of things in the bathrooms. Kids are on their phones. Kids who want to learn about God, they want to see a difference between a community that doesn't care about God versus one that does. And so when they see that difference, they kind of realize, they connect. Oh, well, these people are different. Why? My teacher doesn't have time to talk with me, and that isn't a slight against teachers. It's just they have so many kids and they have so many things. And but when I come to youth group, my leader will talk to me, and I feel like I can share things with them. Hey, at school, I'm kind of afraid for my safety sometimes because there's fights in the bathroom or all different things going on. Hey, at youth group, I don't really have to worry about that because there's adults all over the place, and the kids seem like, hey, they're pretty friendly kids. At school, if I tell my friend something before I know it, everybody else is going to know about it. But at this youth group, hey, the leader said anything that's said in this youth group or in this small group is going to stay in this small group. And my friend shared something, and I've never really seen an interaction like that. So if they don't feel safe, if they don't feel like they can trust the leader, if they don't feel like they can trust the group, then they're not going to want to bring other friends into that. But if they know, hey, look, you can talk about whatever you want. We tell kids, you can ask whatever question you want. I said, I might not answer it, but you can ask whatever question you want. And we're welcome and open to that. And so I think when you kind of create, and I think it's over talked about, and that's why sometimes I hesitate to say, but when you create a safe environment where they feel safe and secure, they just open up. And I'm sure that's something that you've seen as well.
Yeah. And I think, even just that sharing environment that creates a safe boundary for them to, and the way that we kind of put it is like, you can contribute to the conversation safely, like, where it's like, there's questions that can be asked. And that's huge. And of course, like physical safety, being in the position where I've visited a lot of youth ministries, like to train students for Edge Club stuff. And there was a one particular ministry that it was me and another staff person visited, and we walked in and we were like, oh my gosh, like, where are the adults? Like, students are like just hanging out. And I'm like, this, like, I felt unsafe, not like for my own safety. I'm saying like for these students, I'm like, they need to have more supervision, like more, boundaries as far as where people can go in the church and stuff. And I mean, praise the Lord, like nothing happened or anything like that, or like that, but I was like, I had to pull the youth leader aside and be like, dude, like you need some extra help here to really make this even a safer environment. And so anyways, yeah, so I think that is a huge thing, you know, for students to feel physically safe, spiritually safe to share.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's another one?
Yeah. Number 4, I would say they're afraid of rejection, and we haven't effectively communicated.
Like rejection from
their
students
friends
that they'll invite.
Well, I think it's both. I think it's one, they're afraid that yes, they'll invite somebody and they'll say no. And I think 2, they're afraid that they might bring somebody that the group might reject.
Oh, I see. So there's like cliques within
Correct.
your own group.
Yep.
And they, you know, they might not be inclusive of.
Yep. I'm not going to invite my friend if they're, you know, if everybody else isn't going to be friendly, they're going to be rejected. But also too, yeah, I might invite my friend and they might reject the invite. And I think the easiest way to get over that is, which rolls into number 5, they don't understand what's at stake. Why am I going to relationally risk or face possible rejection if I don't understand the importance of it? And so we have never, and this I think is kind of one of the big crux of it, I've never stood up and said, hey, invite your friends. I've just never said it.
So wait, hold on. So you have had 257 new students primarily invited by their friends, and you've never actually told students to invite friends?
No, because I feel it sets the barrier, or excuse me, it sets the expectation too low. The expectation is just invite your friends. It kind of goes back to what we talked about, where it's like, hey, I'm the expert here. You just invite your friends, and then we'll take care of sharing the gospel with them and discipling them. And so when you kind of give that to a kid, it's kind of like, oh, so like my role is just kind of inviting my friends. You know, we set the expectation as like, you know, go and share the gospel with your friends. And then you have some kids who are like, well, if I'm sharing the gospel with them, of course I'm going to invite them to youth group.
Yeah.
Like,
so that's like an easier.
Absolutely.
You know, that you might be onto something there. So you're challenging to something harder, and then inviting their friends is easier.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's
I think that might be a key ingredient here that
Well, I'll give you for instance, okay? We want to encourage kids to get in the Bible daily. The statistics have shown if they just get in the Word 4 days a week, their lives are drastically changed. So why don't we set the expectation at 4 days? Well, because if we set the expectation at 4 days, they're going to do 1, they're going to do 2. And so it's like, no, let's keep the expectation where it is, knowing that a lot of them aren't going to hit that expectation. But what's interesting too is we talk about sharing the gospel. I just did our survey results, our 4-chair survey, and 60% of our kids had a gospel conversation in the past 3 months. And so they're rising to that.
Did you track that before? Like, is that a new, so did that go up, or is that stay the same?
Yeah,
or is that, is that tracking with?
Last year was 40%, around the same time. And so we're setting the expectation at share the gospel, and some kids will aim for that, but they might fall a little short and be like, well, I'll just invite my friends to youth group.
Yeah.
And they might feel like, well, I'm not quite working up to share the gospel. But what they do know is every kid who comes to youth group, we share the gospel with them.
Yeah.
And so it's like, hey, if I want to share the gospel with my friend, I can just invite them to youth group, and they will share the gospel with them. And so we don't set the bar, invite your friends. Because the other thing I'll say too, and this is kind of going along with it, I was talking with one of the girls that we know, she's in college, and she went with a couple of her friends. They tried to find different churches. She said they went Easter morning, and they'd been going to this church for a couple times, and she didn't really love it, but she was like, I don't know. It was kind of like the biggest church in the city. And she said on Easter morning, they hardly talked about Jesus' resurrection, but they told everybody that, hey, you need to bring your friends here. And she was like, it just felt desperate. Like, even though it was like this huge, it felt like it was about them building their church, not about actually helping the people who are coming. And so if we're constantly getting up saying, invite your friends, invite your friends, invite your friends, like, at what point do you care about us? You know, and we want to say we care about your friends for eternal purposes, not to fill a room. And so when you set the expectation at share the gospel, it's no, we care about your friends' eternity. We don't just care about adding more seats to the youth group or filling more seats. And so I think when you kind of set that expectation higher, it kind of just understands like, well, of course I'm going to invite my friends. Like, of course I'm going to, if I'm trying to share the gospel with them, why wouldn't I invite my friends to youth group?
Yeah.
And so, we've never really said, hey, invite your friends. Now, I will say this year we have a goal of a certain amount of kids at youth group, but we view that as a process of making disciples, not as
that's just
inviting.
An outcome or a result. It's not necessarily, it's kind of like yeah. Okay, so then real quick, recap the 5. So go through.
Number 1's, they don't see your program as relevant or worthwhile, which Not saying it is if kids aren't
So
inviting.
how would you take that step to make it more like, no, what's the solution for just identifying the problem?
Yeah, I think when you realize, I think we all kind of know when we've done a series or done a lesson and kids were really engaged. When you kind of see that and feel that, then you're like, okay, we're on to something. And that is one thing that you just can't quite measure.
Okay, so on that note, like that actually, I was kind of surprised by this because I was like, okay, I think this really hit where students were. So we had youth group last night, and I taught on a subject, just kind of how to know which doctrines like are helpful to categorize different things. Like what's the difference between Mormons and because they'll say that they're another denomination of Christianity.
Yep.
And so what does that mean? Like and why do we have different denominations? Like what makes us? So we were talking about different tiers of doctrine and communicated that, and I wrote it up on like a whiteboard that I was teaching with. And then I noticed, like, after we finished, there was a line of students coming up to take a picture of the stuff that I've written down, like just how to categorize different beliefs. And I was like, okay, that seems really relevant to them if they're like coming up and like making sure that they're, taking a picture of it. So, yeah, but I mean, so if that, I mean, not that that's the marker of,
correct,
but yeah, you can kind of get feedback from
pretty
your students.
Pretty simply, if you have kids constantly asking you questions, chances are your programs are relevant and worthwhile. If you have kids who are like, I sat through the lesson, we did the small groups, we did the games, I'll see you, chances are that it's probably not, in my experience. So number one, they don't see the programs as relevant or worthwhile. Number two, they are worried their friends will be unfairly judged. And so we need to create that environment where we know that, hey, everybody's welcome, but we're going to challenge them to step out of sin into trusting Christ. Number three, they don't feel safe. Whether that's just
so how do you know if a student doesn't feel safe? Like if you're a youth leader listening to this, like how do you actually know?
Yeah, if kids aren't willing to share what's going on in their life.
So if you feel like it's surface level, like
correct,
there's not a lot of depth.
For instance, again, last night in the middle of Q&A, one of the questions that somebody wrote on an index card anonymously was, why should I trust Christ? And I was like, okay, sweet. Like this is awesome.
Yeah.
And I just asked, I said, hey, I could answer this. I said, but some of you, I said, would any of you be willing to share what has changed in your life since you trusted Christ? And one girl, she raised her hand. And I said, yeah. She goes, this is in front of, we split our group. So this is in front of like 50 kids. And she starts talking about how her dad has been in and out of prison. And she had an eating disorder. And, she's like, just since I trusted Christ, I've just had peace. And so to be willing to do that in front of 50 kids, it's like, obviously she feels safe. Like this isn't gonna, and if anybody even repeats this, it's fine. Like this is my testimony, this is my story. And so when kids are willing to do that, that they feel safe. Number four, they're afraid of rejection, either from their friend because they don't truly understand the consequences, or they're afraid that their friends will be rejected by their youth group friends. We've all had that. It's like,
well, we can observe that too. Like, like if a new student comes, because everybody's turning their back. I mean, like, is there, like no one really notices or cares, or if someone sitting by themselves and no one else notices but you, that's a kind of sign that it might be fearful of rejection.
Yep. And then lastly, they don't understand what's at stake. We haven't done our best to paint the picture of eternity is at stake every time we meet, and eternity at stake is in every interaction we have.
Which I've used a couple analogies to help with that, like to present the urgency of the gospel. It's like you're walking down the street and you walk past your friend's house, and it's late at night, so they're asleep, but you see that there's a fire growing inside their house. Do you go up and knock on the door? It's like, well, yeah, you'd have to be like evil to not. It's like, so.
But I think in the youth group sense, a lot of times it would be, I'm not going to go knock on the door. I'm going to call the fire department and wait for the fire department to get here to knock on the door. And a lot of time when we say invite your friends, that's kind of the expectation we're setting is like, no, you don't need to take action. Yeah. You need to take the action of getting somebody else involved. And it's like, no, you have been equipped.
Well, and also like to use another analogy too, like you've been given the cure to a cancer that you've, been diagnosed with, and yet you're just going to share, like just keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you want to share it with other people that has the same cancer. Like, it's like your friend has the same cancer. It's like, this is what worked for me. Yeah. Like, and so, so that's where, you don't want to hold, like, it's almost like you see not sharing the gospel as like an act of hatred. Like, I mean, just like, cause you want people to know the truth and that they're in danger. So yeah. Okay. So those are the 5, right? You recapped them.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
let's get into some rapid fire questions. So I'll ask you this one. Should students get a prize for inviting a friend to youth group?
Not an earthly one.
Okay. So tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah,
Your crowns are in heaven.
Correct. I've seen many times where people are like, if they invite this many friends, they get this, or if they invite friends, they get entered to win this. And I think,
do you give prizes for anything, like memorizing a verse, or like, I mean, no. I mean, are you against that, or is it just something you just don't do?
I'm not 100% against it, but I
think of like, I mean, there's a lot, like even like Awana, like they
no,
use
no.
like.
I'm not philosophically against it,
yeah.
But to me, when we can connect with a kid that there are eternal rewards, to me, it's like, okay, what am I going to give them that's better than this? And so when they truly understand that, but I think you have to do it in a way, don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. If it's, hey, they invited 5 friends, so they're going to stand up and they're going to get a prize. It's like, what are you saying to all the first time visitors there? They're going, so you guys just invited me because you wanted this.
Prize. Yeah,
that might not even be true. You might have a kid there who actually wants to see their friend come to know Christ, but you're almost kind of cheat, like making their invite kind of cheap, because it's like, hey, it's like, well,
you did this just to get a hoodie,
yeah,
or an extra snack at the snack bar, or whatever.
Correct. And so
I see what you're saying. That makes sense.
Now we give a small prize to the kids who come for the first time because we want them to feel welcome. So we're not anti-prize or anything like that. But to me, it's like, I guess the end of it is when the kid graduates from youth group, who's going to give them a prize for sharing the gospel with their friend? It's like nobody. Yeah. So are we building disciples who are going to go and make disciples, or are we running a really great program and seeing how many kids we can fit in a room? And we're all for seeing how many kids we can fit in a room.
Yeah, that's good.
But no, I don't think they should get an incentive for inviting a friend. But changed my mind on that. So I'd be
I think that those are valid points. I think that's good. And that's it's even got me thinking of like, because I was just thinking by default, I didn't really think about through it like philosophically, but I'm like, oh, like if a student brings this many friends, whatever, like, well, and there used to be like challenges where it's like, I'll dye my hair green if we have this many students, or like I'll shave my head in front of everybody, and then it kind of cheapens it, because you're like, you only invited me because you wanted to see your youth pastor's head shaved.
Yeah. And I'm not going to invite you again until there's another challenge, right? So I think that kind of
can be it. Okay, so outside of doctrinal error, what would be the biggest red flag as a parent of a youth group student? So you're saying, like, from a parent's perspective,
you go to drop your kid off at youth group and you're first
like,
time,
obviously, like if they believe something crazy, but if you're like, I mean, so now I'm a parent of a middle schooler. Yeah. So I guess this is more directed to me.
Well, let me give my answer and then you can give yours, because I just came to mind. If all of the youth leaders are young, that might be a red flag to me.
Really?
Yeah. Because,
like, what do you mean young? Like in their 20s?
If they're all in their 20s. Because to me, again, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing anything wrong. But to me, and in my past experience, a lot of times when that happens, it's because the leadership is immature as a whole, where they're not bringing in somebody older who can kind of help them through. So that, again, to me, that's not necessarily a deal breaker, but to me, I would note that as be like, that's kind of interesting, because when I think through a lot of the parachurch organizations or things like that, where it's kind of younger kids kind of doing that, it's like they're not mature believers yet. I mean, you can be in your 20s and be a mature believer, so I'm not saying that, but it's like, hey, where's the accountability in this? Where's kind of the kind of multi-generational
that's a good point. I didn't think about that, but I could see how that would be. If I came and like everybody was like 21, 22, I'd be like, you're not that much further along than my student. So I could see that. I would say, well, we've talked about this before about pet peeves, like within youth ministry. So I'm going to bring up one of those of like, if they're like, hey, like, so glad you're here. Like, so glad your son's here. We're just here to love on him. I would be a little bit like, dude, you don't know what that, I mean, that just sounds weird. Yeah. Okay. But we've talked about this before. Yeah. But no, but I would also say, like, just from a broader perspective, like gross games, even though I've been guilty of that in the past.
Yeah.
But if people are still doing like really gross games, like drinking from a sock, drinking Coke through a sock.
COVID killed that.
That's what I'm saying. I think we got away with some of that, like, Yeah, but I mean, I guess I'm just more grossed out about that stuff now. Like, you know, as a
Would your 7th grade son be like, oh, or would he be the one drinking from the sock?
He'd probably be the one that would be drinking from a sock or something. But not in a sense that like I'm even against like the grossness of that. I'm just like, really? Is this what your youth group's about?
Yeah.
Like, you know, what I mean, like, what are you gonna like if you're gonna be known for something?
Yeah.
Is that what you want the students to remember when they leave tonight?
They get a hat that says "I drank from a sock" at this youth group.
Yeah. So anyway, so I would say like and let me I guess, you know, I don't know, not preface this because this would be afterwards.
No apologies.
Let me clarify that if that's what the main focus was you know, to have a gross game, whatever, and then like a 5-minute lesson.
Yes.
Like that's what I'd be like, all right, this is a red flag.
Yeah.
You know, they're not really serious about, you know, equipping students. So yeah, so I think with that, that's an interesting question. Okay, so let's get into some 1-minute questions.
Grab my
You
timer.
have one for me, you have a timer. This is something I love to talk about, guys.
1 minute.
This
Keith.
topic, just 1 minute.
1 minute.
1 minute.
And if you know Keith, if you listen to our podcast, you'll understand why as soon as I ask this question. But Keith, who is Hudson Taylor?
I love Hudson Taylor. He was a missionary to China. He started an organization called China Inland Mission, and he became a doctor so that he could learn how to best serve on the mission field. So he was trained, and he, just his mentality towards basically changing missions in the sense that, like, you know, you would try to, as an Englishman, a lot of missionaries would try to convert people to be Englishmen or English, you know, like, so they would dress a certain way. He was one of the first ones that kind of pioneered a movement where you kind of adapt your culture and your, dress even to the people that you're serving so that you can have more, influence to speak to them. But he started China Inland Mission, which was a focus on taking the gospel into remoter parts of China instead of just the big cities where a lot of missionaries were. So, he pioneered a lot of cool missions movements, and my oldest son is named after him.
There you go. And millions today in China can trace their
so
spiritual
a lot
heritage
of
back in.
I mean a lot of the one of the fastest growing church movements, it's kind of underground church movement in China is attributed to Hudson Taylor's work back in the 1800s. So a lot of cool kingdom work that he kind of set the foundation for. Yeah. Sure. So next one for you, 1 minute countdown.
Yep.
What is communion?
So communion, or the Lord's Supper, as it's referred to, was taken part during the Last Supper. And so the night before Jesus was betrayed, he sat down with his disciples, and he showed them of partaking of the bread, and in that case the wine. And Paul in 1 Corinthians goes back and revisits that and quotes Jesus by saying, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And so the same way with the cup. And so for us, it is a reminder of what Jesus did for us. And so it is not necessary for salvation. We do not believe that it literally becomes Jesus's body and blood. We believe it is simply a symbol, a reminder of what Jesus did for us on the cross. And when we partake of that, it's a time for us to celebrate that, but also examine our own hearts to make sure that we are living in a way that honors what he did for us. So that's communion.
It's good stuff.
Yeah, it is good stuff.
It is.
Depending on
it depends on,
you get.
So, but we don't use wine anymore.
No. We're not a denominational church, so Welch's is a drink of choice. There you go.
Juice.
Yeah.
Is there a certain drink that you shouldn't use for communion?
Ooh.
Like, is that, and I ask this seriously because I have seen youth ministries stretch this a lot.
Well,
where they're like, we're going to have Doritos and Mountain Dew for communion.
Well, when you think about it, like during COVID, when some people were doing online church, it was like when you partook of communion at home, it was like, what do you have in the pantry?
Yeah. I would say, I would not like, of course, there's not hard and fast rules as far as like, biblical standard of like, you cannot use Doritos. But I just think it cheapens it. Like it doesn't, so I would not use Mountain Dew and Doritos for communion. That would be. You
need to use that wafer that tastes like paper in order to really honor Jesus' sacrifice.
some type of bread like that would be closely resembling, the meaning behind like the bread, the body, and then the blood. So some kind of red liquid, not Code Red, Mountain Dew. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, but that is an interesting question. I have heard people say like, or ask that question of like, what can we use for communion? Okay. I would just be careful about that because
I'd put some limits on that.
Yeah, I would definitely put some boundaries limits. All right. Well, do you want to close our episode out? Mr.
Yeah,
Ryne?
no, just appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this episode. Hopefully it's an encouragement to you and your youth ministry. If you have any particular questions, or even if you're like, I disagree with something you said, we welcome that. We are not, we do not have the all the expertise. That is not our desire. Our desire is simply to share what God has done, and maybe in a way that helps you guys. If you got value out of this, please take time to share, subscribe, like, and also too, if you're looking for a way to challenge your student, as always, this podcast is sponsored by Edge Club Student Missionary Training. And so if you want to check that out for yourself and then share it with your students, you can go to edgeclub.org/training, and you can check that out free of charge. So thank you guys so much for checking it out, and we'll see you all next time.